Hi everybody and welcome to the second part of my Custodes painting guide, where I'm gonna show you how to paint the leather, fabric and gemstone parts. And at this point your mini should look something like this. And we'll start with the base coat for the leather parts and only the fabric parts on the legs. And for this we're using a mixture of 3 parts Khorne Red and 1 part Abaddon Black. The reason why I only base coat the fabric parts on the legs with the same base color as the leather parts is simply because they are in such a bad angle that I decided to start with the darker colors and highlight them up. And except for this part we simply base coat all the leather parts. The gloves, the sword grip, the loincloth and the inside of the cloak. For this stage I'm using a Artis Opus Series S size 0 brush. In the next step we're using pure Mephiston Red and starting to base coat all the fabric parts, the helm plume and the unit markings. And as you can see, the color mixture is relatively thin, roughly 1 part water to 1 part paint, and this means we need round about 3 coats to achieve a full coverage here. However, this helps us to avoid losing any kind of details on the parts we're base coating. And I'm still using a Artis Opus Series S size 0 brush. Using a thin mixture of 1 part Mephiston Red, 1 part Abaddon Black and 1 part water, we then start to shade all the recesses of the leather parts. For this stage I switched down to a Artis Opus Series S size 00 brush. With pure Khorne Red, we're then starting to highlight all the leather parts. To create a clean and outstanding look, we're using volumetric highlights on the light facing and raised areas, and to get in a little bit more of sharpness and a little bit more of detail, we're also adding a little bit of thicker edge highlights on all the corners and edges. And I'm still using the Artis Opus Series S size 00 brush. Using a mix of 1 part Khorne Red and 1 part Squig Orange, we then repeat the steps from the previous stage. The only thing we change is that we reduce the size of the volumetric and edge highlights by about 1/3. For the whole stage, I'm using a Artis Opus Series S size 00 brush. To finish the leather parts, we're then using pure Squig Orange, and for the volumetric highlights we only add small reflection highlights, and for the corners and edges we try to create as sharp edge highlights as possible. For the first step on the fabric parts, we're then using a thin mixture of 1 part Mephiston Red and 3 parts water. And we're using this as volumetric glaze highlights on the fabric leg parts. We're doing this to bring this fabric leg parts onto the same color level like the cloak. I push these highlights always into the more lighted directions and try to keep the lower parts darker to keep a natural shadowed look. With a mixture of 1 part Khorne Red and 2 parts water, I then start to create soft shadows around the cloak. I focus here on the lower laying areas and recesses, and I also make sure to apply 2 to 3 thin layers to create smooth transitions between the Mephiston Red and the Khorne Red. Using a mixture of 2 parts Khorne Red, 1 part Abaddon Black and 3 parts water, I then create a glaze mix to deepen the shadows. For the recesses along the edges, I simply load up my brush and use this mixture as a recess shade. For the deeper and larger areas that are supposed to have deep shadows, I also load up my brush with this paint, wipe it off on a paper towel and use this mixture as a glaze in the deepest regions to create real deep shadows. With another layer of 1 part Mephiston Red and 1 part water, I then touch up the highlights on the cloak and try to use this mix also to smooth out the transitions between the shadow and the Mephiston Red base layer. I also use this color to add highlights and reflections in areas that are actually raised but have been accidentally covered by the shadow colors. For this step I switched back to an Artis Opus Series S size 1 brush. With a mixture of 1 part Evil Sunz Scarlet and 1 part water, I then ensure that I highlight all the raised areas of the fabrics with a real intense highlight of Evil Sunz Scarlet. At the same time, I always try to create soft transitions between the layers underneath and the Evil Sunz Scarlet to create smooth transitions. On areas that should pop out a little bit more, I also add a couple of small reflection highlights. This is also the time where I go back to the fabric parts on the legs and highlight them as well. As final highlights for the fabric parts, we use a mixture of 1 part Wild Rider Red and 1 part water. With this mixture we add thin edge highlights to all the edges around the corners, and to increase the overall contrast we also add small reflection highlights to all the raised areas. We also add this kind of highlights to the fabric parts on the legs. In the final part of the video we'll now paint all the gemstones, and to do this we'll use a mixture of 1 part Cantor Blue and 1 part water. And then we'll simply apply this as a base coat to all the gemstones around the mini. In the second step we'll use a mixture of 1 part Thousand Suns Blue, 1 part Cyberite Green and 1 part water. With this mixture we'll now paint a highlight that follows the shape of the gemstone. This highlight should be about 1/3 the size of the gemstone and always be positioned on the shadowed side. Using the same mixture we then place a small dot highlight on the opposite side of our first highlight to simulate a reflection point where light hits the gemstone. Next we'll add 1 part of P3 Morrowite to our Thousand Suns Cyberite Green base mix and simply repeat the pattern from our previous step with a smaller version of our last highlights. To finish the gemstones, I use pure P3 mono white and add a fine white reflection line in the shadowed areas. I also intensify the upper reflection highlights with a thicker white dot in the center of the previous placed highlight dots. Thank you everybody so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I hope you had some fun and I hope to see you soon.